just start with that idea. Let's say that we could get enough energy to get a spacecraft to do 99% the speed of light. What would happen? Well, if you were in the ship, your mass would increase so many times, it would probably crush you and destroy you, and you turn into some sort of vaporous gas or liquid in the back of the ship. If you decided, and say you're doing 99.99% the speed of light, or even 1/10 of it. Let's say you're only doing 1/10 of it. And all of a sudden you see an incoming asteroid, and you got to turn right. What's going to happen? You're going to be spamming a can. You're going to go right through the windshield. And everybody knows, even doing a couple hundred miles an hour, I mean, that's going to happen. And yet we hear stories of UFOs flying in and stopping. I mean, if you read the MUFON files, and I've gone through Lynn Simpson's files the MUFON files at Lynn Simpson's house, and the Gulf Breeze sightings, you'll see this UFO just hovering there, and all of a sudden, it just shoots out. What are the G-forces on a sudden acceleration like that going to do to any pilot? It's going to destroy you. In the footage you're about to see in the NASA stuff, you're going to see ships making high-speed right-angle turns. You're going to see them appear and disappear. You're going to see things that only a new type of physics is going to explain. But there is something, I don't want to criticize Bob Lazar's element 115 because there's something brilliant about it. He also came up with the idea of creating a gravity generator, gravity wave generator. But also, element 115 did not exist in physics, even in the time of Glenn Seaborg's life, who just died a few years ago. It was a theoretical particle. It had never existed. He gave us a formula, an exact formula on how to create it, how it can exist for a fraction of a second, how you can get mass to exist at element 115. Well, at the University of California at Berkeley, only a few years ago, they created it for a very short duration of time. And the formula with which they created it, and I looked at it, it's almost identical to a T to what Lazar is saying. To a T. I mean, that is stunning. I mean, these are top physicists at the University of California, Berkeley, who did this. To a T. I propose a whole new theory in physics, a whole new way that these UFOs are doing this. I cannot, you have to get so frustrated. What I'm trying to do to your minds right now is get you frustrated with the idea of increasing energy on mass. The G-forces on even subtle turns. You're going to see in the tape coming up here a little ball of light moving over the curvature of the Earth and disappearing on the other side of the Earth. This is in my documentary film. I calculated at 0.9 million miles per hour, assuming it moved over 1,000 miles of Earth space distance while the shuttle's cameras are looking down at the Earth in 4 seconds. That comes to 0.9 million miles an hour. And I actually subtracted the backwards spin of the Earth from that, and it just leaves you a few, it's only, the Earth spins at about 1,000 miles an hour so from the equator. So I just have to extract a little bit of speed on that one. But still, 0.9 million miles an hour, 0.89 million miles an hour is faster than anything known to man. And even the curvature of the Earth, and going around it in 1,000 miles in 4 seconds, the G-forces would kill anybody in this room. There is only one way. When you get frustrated with all of this, when you have to come to the ultimate conclusion that this is not how they're doing it. And once I banged my head against the wall on this long enough, I just said, there's too much evidence in UFO sightings and phenomena of craft that are able to convert their mass into what appears to be light. If you could, theoretically, and in the beginning, when I first proposed this theory to nuclear physicists, they laughed at me. But that's because they haven't looked deeply into the subject on a very deep quantum level. When you tell a scientist that you're going to convert mass into light, they're like, yeah, sure. There's no way. That's not possible. But that's the only way. That's what I started with. So if you could, theoretically, if you could reduce a spaceship's mass to 0, and yet it still has protons, neutrons, and electrons, you're actually not reducing its mass. Mass is determined by the protons and the neutrons and the electrons. The neutron has no mass, but most of the mass is in the proton and the electron in the atom. The electron has the smallest amount of mass. But that's where it all is. What you're going to do is reduce the effective mass, its weight charge, down to 0. Now, if you get a spaceship to weigh in as little as a photon, how much energy does it take to do the speed of light? In Einstein's formula, energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. If mass is 0, energy is 0. It's not about energy anymore. I really believe that I'm going to present to you clear evidence of not only that this is how they are doing this. Once a spacecraft is down to zero mass, would they see a mass energy signal the size that Earl Van Landingham is looking for at NASA? Would they see it? No, they would not, because there is no energy required to get zero mass to do the speed of light. The way you would detect the phenomena of UFOs would be that you would have to start searching the electromagnetic spectrum. You'd have to look for visual confirmation in the electromagnetic spectrum. And at the bottom of the electromagnetic spectrum, you have low-end radio, and radio goes all the way up into, you go up into high-end radio in the billion hertz range, and then you get up into microwaves, which is radar, and above microwave and television, you get up into infrared, and above infrared, you get to the color red, and you go through all the color spectrums. Colors are just frequencies of waves. That's all they are, just frequencies of waves. And then you get up into the ultraviolet. Ultraviolet is divided into near, far, and extreme. It's huge. It's a bandwidth that looks about 6 or 7 times as wide as the rainbow spectrum that we actually see. And above that, you got X-rays and gamma rays. As soon as I got this footage from Martin Stubbs, the first thing I did, 20 years experience as a professional photographer, I said, what kind of cameras are they using? These don't look like ordinary cameras. This footage is in black and white. NASA is saying these are low-light sensitive cameras. Where are they looking in that spectrum? That's the first thing I wanted to know. And very quickly, in my dialogues with Dr. Joseph Knuth III, head of astrochemistry at NASA, and some of their astrophysicists, I learned very quickly that NASA was peering where the human eye could not see. There were tons of calls for proposals on their website for cameras that could see into the infrared and also the near ultraviolet. I actually confirmed the exact wavelengths on the camera. When I went on the Art Bell Show in the year 2000 with James Oberg, our dear and lovely friend, who everybody hates, I'm sure, in this room. I hate James Oberg so bad. He's just so unscientific. I just want to punch him. And he's a big guy. Anyway, I don't even want to speak to James Oberg anymore, but at the moment we were arguing on that show, this is, I think, in the year 2000, about the fact that the cameras can see into the near ultraviolet. The satellite in the internet broadcast turned off, disappeared, gone. We were off the air. And those two technologies, the internet broadcast that Art Bell has and the satellite, are not technologically on the same system. How could they have been turned off in the same second? They didn't turn back on until the show was over. Next day, Art Bell said he got a call from National Security, or an email, saying that David Sarita was going into areas of physics and naming names and people in the agency that the American public were not ready for at this time. NASA doesn't want you to know they're looking everywhere. They're looking in the ultraviolet. They're looking in the infrared. They're looking in all the way up into gammas, and they don't want you to know that. That was the secret. That was why we got shut down. So, with what I've just told you, you can even go through your mind very clearly, and how many sightings of UFOs did someone say they saw a light, a translucent light, and they saw a craft disappear, and they saw a craft suddenly stop and turn right on a dime? The only thing that could turn right on a dime at several thousand miles an hour is something that has zero mass. That would mean, in theory, that I would have to reduce the mass effect. I'm not actually getting rid of my protons, neutrons, and electrons. I'm reducing the effective mass down to zero with my pilot as well. If you're zero mass and you're in a spacecraft at zero mass and you decide to turn right, if you have no mass, there's no G-force. You can bounce off the walls. What I eventually start to do is I start to do a study that no one has actually conducted properly in physics. And I looked everywhere for this. I searched Richard Feynman. I searched all the best minds. I scrubbed everything. A deep study into what is the difference between light and mass. What is the actual difference? When you get down to looking at matter on a quantum level, it's all particles and waves. That's all it is. That's all we are. That's all light waves are. So what is the difference? Therein lies the answer in how you can convert mass into light. So the first thing we're going to do, just with the mindset that these craft are able to convert their mass into light, let's look at a piece of footage. We're going to run this tape. If we can run the first part of the tape. This aired on Fox News after the X-Files final episode. They put me on with astronauts Gordon Cooper and Wally Schirra, and we got into a big debate about this whole thing on the news. So if we can run the video, part one, I'll...
By the astronauts. Sound like something weird is going on here? Maybe out of this world? Well, a group of UFO believers say absolutely. And they've combed through hundreds of hours of NASA tape and claim to have uncovered floating discs and sharply turning streaks. What are they? Well, that depends on whom you want to believe. John Beard has the story.
What's that streak flashing by Earth?
That is simply cannot be a natural object.
Or these discs appearing to pass behind a 12-mile-long orbiting tether.
The UFOs go behind the tether.
And look to the left, that little blip making a high-speed turn. Watch it again.
We're looking at speeds that are beyond anything known to science.
Up top there, that circular image racing away from a space shuttle.
This is suggesting incredible intelligence.
But just how incredible is this? David Sereda calls himself a UFOologist. He has taken a new view of some old space tape, but some say he's just pushing sci-fi to new extremes. Former astronaut Wally Schirra.
We've been up there months and months of time, and you've not heard many people talk about seeing the things this guy talks about.
We could make the assumption that there's a connection here.
That hardly discourages Sereda, who says he started hunting for UFOs on NASA tapes after working for a physicist for several years.
I have a good knowledge of physics and putting it in layperson's terms.
Now, you're not a physicist yourself.
I'm not a physicist myself. I'm more of a physicist translator, if you will.
And so he's produced a 3-hour videotape to try to prove his case. He calls it Evidence, the case for NASA UFOs, and uses the space agency's own tapes and a blackboard.
You're going to see an object come in, make a high-speed turn, heading out into space.
And remember that streak?
It escapes Earth's gravity, so we have to assume that it has internal energy in it, and that leads us to the possibility that we're looking at a UFO.
We sent Sereda's tape to Schirra, one of the pioneering Mercury 7 astronauts, a veteran of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions.
He's taken a little bit of footage with some aberrations. It could either be film footage aberrations, or it could be something we just don't know about, but in essence, he's made a big deal out of nothing.
Schirra pulled out some of the tape he shot from Gemini 6, and those fuzzy circles, he says, are simply out-of-focus space dust and debris.
So you're saying you guys saw stuff like that all the time?
It was a normal part of the routine.
That, he says, should put a cap on this UFO tape debate. Hardly, says Sereda. He points to a NASA experiment that went wrong in 1996. A Shuttle Columbia crew deployed a satellite towing a 12-mile-long power-generating tether, which shorted out and snapped off.
The tether has broken. It is going away from it.
And here's the part that excites Sereda.
Columbia and the satellite now 77 nautical miles apart.
And all of a sudden it's swarmed by these disc-shaped UFOs. The UFOs go behind the tether. I think just about any moron can tell the difference between when a disc is going behind this piece of wood and when it's going in front of it. That's in front, that is behind.
That's another light phenomenon as far as I'm concerned.
Sereda also takes note of what happened during a spacewalk.
Looks like you got an object right in front of you, Mark, when you're looking out there. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Never mind. Are we missing something? I don't see anything. Yeah, we think the camera filter came off, Mark.
Sereda doubts that, saying camera filters just don't unscrew in space and float off.
Again, this is one of NASA's blatant lies.
Years earlier, John Glenn had an encounter with space objects, depicted here in The Right Stuff.
I see something strange out here. Oh, my goodness gracious, what the heck is that? You don't think these things could be alive, do you?
Schirra says later missions answered that.
Well, those particles are molecular water.
Mass is reducing.
But Sereda gets some qualified support from this space veteran, Gordon Cooper, another of the Mercury 7. In his book, Leap of Faith, Cooper makes his own case in support of UFOs.
I guess I kind of agree with him in the fact that I think that there are extraterrestrials coming to this Earth.
So how do the mysteries on those NASA tapes get resolved? UFOologist Sereda already has that figured out.
The only way we're going to solve this is if you put me on the space shuttle, show me what we were seeing on the video for myself so I can come back and you can prove me wrong. That's my goal, to get on the space shuttle.
You too?
Yeah.
NASA has yet to produce David Serrata's ticket to ride. And as to the UFO debate, well, as Gordon Cooper puts it, this will never be settled until one of these things lands on the White House lawn and a creature jumps out and shouts, "Hi." I'm John Beard, Fox 11 News.
Well, there's the giggle factor. The weird music, all of it. But I think they did a pretty good job compared to a lot of other TV shows I've done. And Bob Tarlow at Fox News, actually, who has called me back many times. And actually, a friend of mine, David Sadler, who ran for Congress in Illinois, is the one, he tipped me off to the Mexican press conference that Jaime Maussan was putting out in Mexico on the recent UFO encounter there in the infrared. And I phoned Bob Tarlow at Fox News. He got on it right away, and it was because of that Bob Tarlow ran it nationally. And once Fox ran it nationally, it was everywhere. And I believe Santiago Utrilla also got it on the San Diego station down south. So they are very open-minded over there, and they do make a little bit of fun of it. But Bob Tarlow is really into this stuff at Fox. I mean, even though they laugh a little bit and they have fun with it, they really are seriously into it. So the first thing I did is start sharing the footage. I mean, there was so much going on in that footage. First of all, when the two astronauts were having the dialogue on the Hubble Space Telescope, Fox News slipped out one part of the dialogue, very important dialogue, and that is, "Mark, it's at your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, going away, don't worry about it." That's an important piece of dialogue that the news cut out. That's in the original tape. I've used cameras professionally for 20 years. When you screw on a lens filter, those things don't just float and spin off and go flying out there. When he said it's at your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, going away, don't worry about it. And then after that he says, "Discovery, we're giving you an orbiter state vector, which is focus on the mission, don't talk about the object anymore." I researched the communication systems on the shuttle. They have two channels. They have a public, non-encrypted channel where they do a lot of the communications for the live NASA downfeed, and then they have a Department of Defense encrypted channel. That's where the real conversations go on that we never hear about. I would love it if someone like John Greenwald could tap into that, into the black vault in NASA's radio systems. So as I started sharing the footage, I all of a sudden got into this debate at NASA. I had no idea what it was about. They were going to spring-load on me here. But this is an incredible debate, and not many people know about this. It's called the Great Water Ball Mystery at NASA. This is the idea that mass could disappear, that you know, what we're seeing in Mexico are UFOs that you can't see with your eyes, that are detectable on infrared. How does mass disappear? How did the UFO I saw disappear? Well, in theory, in physics, mass can't disappear. We use a number of ways to detect mass. Any gas, liquid, or solid object, when sunlight bounces off of that object, whether it's gas, liquid, or solid, you get temperature. And you can pick up almost anything with physicality on infrared. But what I'm about to share with you is so baffling, and so many physicists at NASA cannot figure this one out. This is a mind puzzle that nobody over there knows the answer to. And they just put me in the middle of it because I was sharing footage of fuzzy balls of light that looked similar to what they were actually detecting over there. In 1995, an astrophysicist named Dr. Louis A. Frank from the University of Iowa, who is a National Space Act Award-winning astrophysicist, was making discoveries in the far and extreme ultraviolet. That's even further out, higher in wavelength than the near ultraviolet, of what appeared to be fuzzy little translucent balls of water that were coming into Earth, supposedly from deep space. The balls of water were allegedly depositing into our upper atmosphere and vaporizing and raining down water into the atmosphere. The problem was the objects only showed up in the far and extreme ultraviolet and some in the near ultraviolet. If they were physical balls of water, you should be able to see them visually in the visuals, I mean, from the color red to violet. Nothing showed up on visual cameras at all. Then Department of Defense and NASA cooperated together and went looking for these things on infrared. COBE, IRAS, and ISO, three of our infrared Explorer satellites, went looking for these things at the request of Department of Defense. Why was Department of Defense so curious about a bunch of balls of water? Well, they went looking for them, and they couldn't find anything on infrared. And because nothing showed on infrared, they thought, well, the head of astrochemistry at NASA tells me that, well, if it's a ball of water, They're the size of a small house. They're doing 35,000 miles an hour coming into the Earth. With sunlight hitting the ball of water, you should get a temperature of 300 Kelvin. And against the cold background of space, which is minus 273 centigrade, 300 Kelvin should be an infrared beacon. An amazingly clear picture should show up on infrared. Nothing. Nothing. These guys are just, they don't know what to do. I wrote Edgar Mitchell about this, and he said, well, if there's nothing in the infrared, then there's nothing there. That's the end of the story. I'm like a prober. I'm a details guy. I just start focusing in deeper and deeper and deeper until we get an answer. First thing I said was, well, if these are balls of water, allegedly, and they're coming in from deep space, and they're the size of a small house, I said, wouldn't, as they get close to the sun and near the third rock from the sun, start to heat up, and they would basically vaporize and disappear? I said, they shouldn't even be here. And the head of astrochemistry at NASA, Dr. Joseph Newt III, agreed with me. He said, that's one of the problems with Frank's hypothesis. How did they get here? I mean, they couldn't survive the temperatures in space. Space is freezing, yes. It would turn to ice, but as soon as you get near the sun, it heats up and it melts, and it basically disappears. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is even worse. They're finding a rate of deposition of these objects of 10 to 20 million impactors per year. Imagine a 35,000-ton ball of water doing, a 30-ton ball of water actually doing 35,000 miles an hour, coming into, raining like raindrops into the Earth's atmosphere. Newt wrote me back and said, no satellite or the space shuttle has a chance of surviving days, let alone years, if these were physical balls of water. Because a 35,000-mile-an-hour ball of water that big is going to destroy every satellite in the sky. It's going to devastate the space shuttle. And he said, yet no satellite has ever been struck by one of these objects. That's a huge problem for those guys over there. So I proposed that the balls of water were moving around the space shuttle and around the satellites, and no way could they go there. That would mean intelligence. No way is NASA going there. So I proposed it, and then I said, well, if they are balls of water, and they are depositing into their atmosphere, I said, wouldn't the water, the H and the O, under intense solar radiation in the upper atmosphere, separate? Hydrogen and oxygen would separate, and the O2, oxygen, would get further transmutate into ozone. And I said, is this proof that there is a God? I mean, we all know our ozone layer is dying. Is someone sending us balls of water intelligently driven to help us heal our ozone layer? And he said, you're right. He said it would produce some ozone, but we don't know how much. And that would mean that there is possibly a benevolent force behind these balls of water. But the idea that the balls of water were not hitting any satellites means that they're not physical. And if they're not showing up on any infrared cameras, these things are not physical. But they're behaving like balls of water. Lou Frank sent me pages of physics and data on the balls of water. I mean, they're behaving like them. You can't deny his data, but they're invisible. You can't see them. They're only in the ultraviolet. They're not in the visible spectrum, and they're not in the infrared. So I'm going to kind of leave this subject for now because that's where I started with. I started sending Louis A. Frank the tapes, the Martin Stubbs tapes. And Frank got into these incredible conversations with me. He was telling me that all his researchers were so fascinated because they had been looking at still photos from the Ultraviolet Explorer satellites that they were taking pictures from of these water balls. They had never seen motion of them before. So he thought, he wrote me back and said, some of the objects on the tapes you're sending me are behaving like these supposed balls of water. Others are not, meaning the giant disks you're about to see on the tether incident. He could not explain those. And when I went through Frank's data, this man is so brilliant that he can tell from the light curves whether an object you're looking at on a certain camera and studying its wavelengths is a piece of dust, as NASA proposes, and Jack Hasher can verify this. Everything you're seeing on these tapes is either the planet Venus or little balls of dust and cookie crumbs that are floating by the space shuttle and getting close to the lens of the camera, and they're moving around. The planet Venus moves so often and in such incredible speeds that I propose that we don't even need UFOs. We just need to go to Venus. And we can go anywhere we want. Those are the kind of answers you get over there. In fact, when you watch the tether tape in full, you'll hear them say, oh, that's the planet Venus. And then you can see it moving around and going like this. I want to go there. So The very fact that Frank could not, in the end, he said he could not explain some of the phenomena on the tape. That is the game you play at NASA. I never use the word UFO over there. All my work is process of elimination. We went through meteorites, shooting stars, debris, how it behaves. Even the tape you saw two little things that look like meteorites and they're speeding along, right? Well, the one on the top goes faster than the one on the bottom. When, Newton and Galileo physics tells us that if you don't have internal energy in an object and you drop it into gravity, everything falls at the same speed, regardless of its mass or weight or size or volume or anything. You'll also notice in the tether incident, which we're about to go into, you'll see things moving at all different velocities. I've often lied in an afternoon in a room with a beam of light coming through the window in a dusty room, and I've watched dust just move around. It all moves at the exact same speed, unless each piece is introduced into the space with different energies. Then they'll go in different velocities. But everything moves at different velocities. That's breaking the natural laws of gravity and physics. That's a peculiar fact number one. But the fact that Frank could not explain the phenomenon was so perplexing to him, he was about to give me this incredible statement at a moment that was so key in my research. And my partner, Martin Stubbs, had accidentally shared emails, all my emails at NASA, and I have lengthy emails that are all in my book. The dialogues are so interesting. They're so detailed. Incredibly open individuals at NASA. The scientists over there believe that a lot of this stuff needs to be tested. They were very open to that idea if someone would fund it. But the fact that Frank could not explain the phenomena, he went on Fox News San Diego and actually stated that. That is a huge statement for NASA to make. But before he started getting more open with me, Russell Callahan and Graham Birdsall, who released the footage to the world at Bob Brown's conference, went through my emails and started writing letters, and they went public with the footage just before I got my final answers, and everyone at NASA shut down. They wouldn't talk to me anymore because they knew I was doing UFO investigations. They had no idea I was doing UFO investigations. They thought I was doing process of elimination, which is real science, and I was. Meteorites, I learned quickly from Joseph Newth III also, unless they're massive, they basically disintegrate in a matter of seconds over a very small distance in kilometers or miles. They burn up. The only way comets or meteorites streak for very long periods of time is if they're huge. Now, all throughout these NASA tapes that I've looked from the Stubbs footage, you'll see balls of light that just keep going and going and going all the way around the other side of the planet. Now, if they were meteorites, and that's what you'll hear in the commentary on the NASA tape, they should have been massive because they didn't burn up. And that means they would have eventually impacted with the Earth and created massive craters on the Earth. We would have, level extinction events going on the Earth almost every day, according to what this footage is showing, if these are actual meteorites. They could not possibly be meteorites because you don't see these things extinguished. They keep going and going and going, and they just don't die. So rather than go into this huge body of footage, tonight we're just going to go into SDS-75, the tether incident, and we're going to break it down because inside of this incident is a signature so clear, so incredibly clear on their propulsion systems, how they're able to convert mass into light. I think it's so stunning, and it's really, this is where evidence gets very detailed. This is where, in a court of law, this stuff gets so finely detailed. It raises so many questions. So many arguments are created over by what you're about to see. This is where the evidence comes in. You're going to see a correlation here that is undeniable on how these systems work. So the first thing we're going to do is run the next part of the tape, and we're just going to look at the tether incident just in RAW. And remember, this is in the ultraviolet, possibly infrared. The astronauts may not have seen this to the naked eye. And these disks, as they pass behind the 12-mile length of the tether, could measure between 2 and 3 miles in diameter, making them Independence Day-sized craft of light. Also notice the black holes in the center and what Peter Davenport showed us today of the eyewitness testimony of the dark mass in the center of the translucent disk.
Copy.
Columbia and the satellite now 77 nautical miles apart. Again, that call reporting that the crew can see the tether and see the satellite. It's beautiful.
All different velocities.
This view showing...
He's stunned. Look at those different velocities on those things.
the satellite.
That's not dust.
Again, just moving into sunrise. 81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
Guys getting the image?
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us, and it's illuminated by the sun at such low angles. So there's a lot of stray light, and it's getting washed out quickly, but Claude is trying to do a quick, good job here adjusting the cameras.
Copy that.
In that description by the crew, this is the tether in the satellite with approximately 12 miles of tether still attached to it.
Notice the pulsing.
Columbia and the satellite now just passing over the west coast of northern Africa. The two spacecraft now
Two channels.
90 nautical
One's
miles
encrypted,
apart.
One's not.
Controllers for the satellite did have communications with it during the close pass between Columbia and the satellite.
Look at how long that zoom was. Those things are far away from the cameras. And that was a
Columbia,
long
Houston, that's
zoom.
a much better view, a lot more contrast visible. And how wide does that tether appear to be? It seems to resemble a much wider strand than we'd expect. Can you describe which way the satellite is visible on that strand?
This is 1997. 1996, sorry. February. March. Early March.
Satellite now 100 nautical miles.
Charlie, completely unzoomed, and you see the full extent of the tether. I tried to adjust the focus, but I can't get better than that.
Okay, Claude. Thank you.
I'm going to zoom in now.
In the summer of 1999, I met with Martin Stubbs, the program manager of a cable TV station, who had recorded over 400 hours of NASA's live broadcast. He gave me some videotape on a new incident that happened in February of 1996 on Space Shuttle mission STS-75, what was called the tether incident. So what you just saw on the videotape showed a 12-mile-long satellite, a satellite attached to a 12-mile-long tether, which is like a conductor cable. It's a very, very thin, 1/10 of a centimeter in thickness cable that was used to conduct electricity in the Earth's ionosphere. As we saw earlier, space is supercharged with high-energy particles, and NASA was trying to take advantage of these particles to see if they could build up a charge on the tether and actually see a gain or produce some electricity. They charged the tether with some electricity, but then an overload of highly charged particles flooded the tether and produced so much electricity it snapped. On February 25th at about 7:30 p.m., the tether broke away from the Shuttle Columbia and drifted about 77 miles away. So the scene that you just saw actually starts at about 77 miles away. The camera pans down. We see a long line, which is 12 miles long of tether, a small satellite attached to the end, and then a swarm of little objects, little balls of light, just moving in from all different directions and different velocities and different speeds. Then the cameras actually zoom in, and we actually get to take a close look at what we're seeing here. It's astounding. We see up here in the right-hand corner, we see a very large disk clearly going behind the tether. And we can actually see little black dots racing around to suggest some sort of a magnetic field effect. And coming through the middle, we see another very large disk moving clearly behind the tether. The light from the tether shines in front of the background object, which is the UFO. If we use this piece of wood as an example, we can see what a disk looks like when it's passing behind a foreground object. It's really quite simple. So if the disk was passing in front of the tether, it would look something like this, and it doesn't look like that. When we look in the middle and we see this large disk passing through the middle, we can see again it's passing behind the tether. If this was the tether and this was the UFO, we could clearly see it's going behind. And if it was going in front, it would look something like this. It doesn't look like that. So because we know the shuttle is at least 77 miles away and drifting further away from the object, from the tether, and we know the objects are going behind the tether, we can therefore use the 12-mile length of the tether as a relative measuring rod for actually making measurements of the minimum diameters of some of these disks. And according to my calculations, against the 12-mile length of the tether, this disk passing through the top section here measures a minimum of 2 to 3 miles in diameter. That's assuming it's right up next to the back of the tether. If it's actually farther behind the tether than I think, then the disk could be much, much larger. The further it gets behind it relative to the distance of the tether, the larger it actually is in reality and compared to measuring it against the tether. Again here, this disk going through the middle here, I estimate it to be between 2 and 3 miles in diameter. If a UFO were flying over the city of Los Angeles in the downtown core or New York, and it was 2 to 3 miles wide in diameter, it would black out the entire sky. It would be an Independence Day-sized craft that would literally cause massive panic and massive alarm.
Nautical miles apart.
Stop the tape there, please.
Again, that call.
Okay, that's just some very simple introductory, observations. The size of the objects, none of them ever hit each other. You'd think if they were, cookie crumbs or crackers from the astronauts' lunch, that things would bounce into each other. And I've used cameras for over 25 years professionally, and I also use video. And you heard Claude Nicollier, the astronaut, saying, "I'm trying to adjust the focus and I can't get any better than that." When CCD video cameras are in focus, their depth of field of focus is so vast that, and I've done this test, on my own cameras, and even when you watch these football games, you can see when it's raining the little drops of water on the lens of the camera, on the filter, while the players in the background are in focus. That's called depth of field of focus. That's how deep your focus field is. And in normal 35mm cameras, when f-stops or apertures of cameras open up, the depth of field shrinks, meaning anything that goes outside of that depth of field of focus could be an out-of-focus object. Many people at NASA contend that what you're seeing, everything is just out-of-focus orbs called airy disks. Well, when CCD cameras are in focus, stuff doesn't go out of focus. And if Claude Nicollier he's saying, "I can't adjust the focus any better than that," well, if he can't adjust the focus on a camera, it shouldn't be up there. Because it's so easy. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. The camera's in focus. I have shots, other shots, that I can't go into right now because there's so much footage, where you'll see a smudge mark on the window pane of the shuttle. And you've got your very high-tech cameras. I actually know the model number of this camera. I know who makes the sensors to look into the ultraviolet. And you'll see a smudge mark on the window pane in focus, while the Earth 300 miles below is simultaneously in focus. That's your established depth of field. That means once you've established your depth of field on the camera, nothing passing in between those 2 points can possibly be out of focus. It's impossible. It cannot happen. And yet, with that smudge mark in focus on the window pane, you'll see these same translucent discs with the black hole in the center going by. And in one segment you saw on the Fox News, you'll actually see them gathering in a circle. They fly into formation in a circle, stop, and then they light up. Stop, light up. And then one flies into the center, stops, and lights up. I don't know how dust can do that. I mean, there's just no way in the world that NASA can tell me, well, you know, odds are 1 in 10 trillion that dust that day just happened to decide to get together and have lunch in a big circle. Just no way. Those are the kind of answers you get from the low-end people there, the public people. James Oberg will tell you everything is an illusion. But when you get into their physicists like Lou Frank, I play cat and mouse with these guys. They can't trick me. I know their language. I know the cameras. And they don't try to trick me either. I'd rather hear them say we don't know than try to tell me it's swamp gas. It's so much more intelligent to say we don't know. The same with Mexico. Don't tell us from our best universities. Canada said it was a bunch of balloons. Mexico said ball lightning and swamp gas. Ball lightning goes like this and it's gone. You don't get 11 UFOs showing up in the infrared surrounding a craft for over a half an hour if it's swamp gas. Those are the kind of answers they give us. But if you took that same footage to someone like Lou Frank, you know, Mexico, you'll get a way different answer, far more intelligent answer.